Campaign 2020 is sponsored by Wisconsin Hospital Association, Quick Trip, Wisconsin Counties Association, Wisconsin Realtors Association, and Wisconsin Operating Engineers Local 139.
Sandra Ewald of Green Bay is a Democratic candidate in the 30th Senate District. The primary is August 11th. Sandra, welcome to WisconsinEye.
Thank you.
You have a career in healthcare administration. Was healthcare issues the reason you got into the campaign, or what would you list as the chief campaign issue, please?
Certainly, and actually there are a couple of issues that got me interested in running for the state Senate seat. I think increasingly I've been very concerned where both our state and our country are going, and I worry about the future of my children and grandchildren. Certainly healthcare is a big issue, and I am concerned about a lack of affordable access to healthcare now and going forward. The environmental issues, very much worry about global warming and, what kind of world are we leaving behind for our children. The education, to me, education is the foundation of our democracy, and I am concerned about some of the changes we see taking place in education and the funding cuts that have resulted in larger class sizes, cuts to what I consider important programs around the arts and things like social support. Okay,
well, let's go through a list of some of the issues. Governor Evers has warned that given the economic fallout of the pandemic, tax collections may drop in the next year, fiscal year, which starts today, by $2 billion. That would give legislators like you, if you're elected to the Senate, tough choices. You've either got to cut spending or you'd have to raise taxes or fees. Where would you come down given that difficult choice?
Yeah, in all likelihood, I believe it would probably have to be a combination of those two. I think the big wild card right now is what kind of federal aid will be coming to the states. So to really understand the depth of what that deficit is going to be is difficult with that uncertainty right now. But I would anticipate that, we would have to really have everything on the table and look at the cost benefit trade-offs, and it would probably be a combination of both.
Okay. So, but you're not willing to cut our state aid for our K-12 schools, right?
I actually think that would be a mistake. That's not to say that there's nothing there, because I haven't been in to see the detail level of some of that. But to me, again, education is such a foundational part of our future success that I would hesitate to cut in education.
Okay. New subject. The Constitution says that the party in power will draw the next boundary lines for Congress, Assembly, and Senate. The governor has proposed a People's Commission that would draw lines and forward those proposed lines to the Capitol and the legislature. Where do you stand on current law versus what the governor wants?
I believe that what the governor wants is a much better solution than having maps drawn in a partisan way. I think to have an independent commission draw those lines will help prevent the gerrymandering that we have today. It'll give us better representation with the seats more reflecting the popular vote. I think to align geography where people have common challenges into one district makes sense. So I would really support the idea of an independent commission. I think there'd be a lot of transparency around it, so everybody understood what was happening as the process was going through. And so we understood where that recommendation came from. But I absolutely support the nonpartisan process.
Well, another issue that emerges every session is the issue of recreational and medical marijuana. Your positions on both those, please?
I would actually support legalization. I think, I have some notes here. I was looking at this yesterday. I know that Governor Evers has proposed to make possession of 25 grams or less legal. I would support that. In 2017, the Wisconsin Department of Revenue estimated an annual benefit of about $138 million in tax revenue if we were to legalize marijuana. And then there'd also be significant savings in law enforcement and legal and in our prisons and incarceration systems. And that benefit I saw, estimated anywhere between $40 and $100 million. I don't, I support legalization. I think the penalties reinstill on, first offenses, even if a person isn't going to prison, it really impacts them in their life and looking for jobs, housing, you name it. And it seems like a pretty stiff penalty for possessing marijuana. And then on a second offense, 3.5 years, up to 3.5 years. I just don't see where that's in the best interest of society. So I support legalization.
I understand. Americans know now a lot more about how police conduct themselves sometimes when they have suspects in custody than we did 2 months ago. Do we need statewide standards for how police treat those in custody? Do we need to ban chokeholds, no-knock warrants? Do we need to keep a database of officers who most often use violence to subdue suspects?
Absolutely. I think we need to minimize, force to the absolute minimum necessary. Obviously, that would require some retraining, clear policies and procedures, training. I think it's also important that there's a clear complaint system. So if somebody believes that excessive force has been used, with some sort of, nonpartisan outside view of the incident. The database idea is a good one. That way, again, there's transparency about officers who may have a long history of using force.
Thank you. Let's talk 2 questions on COVID-19. The pandemic has not only hit the economy, but healthcare providers that the state relies on especially hard. The recession causes less revenue for the state, but more demands for safety net programs like Medicaid. If you're a senator voting on the next state budget, should hospitals be made a greater priority than they have been in light of the COVID-19 pandemic?
Not a real clear-cut answer here.
Okay.
I think there's a lot that the state can do around making sure that we have a central warehouse and planning for things like pandemic supplies and any emergency types of equipment. I think the state should be accepting the Medicaid expansion dollars. Especially if we end up having to expand the Medicaid program, that's hundreds of millions of dollars that would be available to the healthcare systems without having to take from other areas. So I think that's part of the solution. I think we can't focus just on hospitals because the entire healthcare continuum it plays into this. I think we need to look at how do we develop our resources for more, telemedicine type services, home health and home health monitoring equipment. I think I think it'd be a mistake just to focus on the hospitals because other parts of the system are distressed also.
Okay, understand. One other COVID question: Should businesses that follow all prescribed COVID-19 practices and recommendations, either of WEDC or the CDC, be immune from frivolous lawsuits? Sandra?
Absolutely.
Why?
If they've followed all of the recommendations, I just think in order to have a business climate where our small businesses can thrive, I think it's a necessity. Otherwise, there's going to be a great fear of reopening and getting the economy going.
Okay. Property tax is always a controversial issue. Wisconsin has some of the highest property taxes in the nation, which is why school districts and local governments have their property tax levies capped or limited. Of course, they can go to referendums and exceed the caps if the voters want to. My question is, if you're a state senator, would you vote to keep these property tax caps or get rid of them?
I would vote to keep them. I think there has to be control. There are so many people living on fixed incomes that you just can't continuously escalate those responsibilities. I think it's too difficult.
Okay, another follow-up question on property tax. Property tax funds 40% of the cost of services provided by counties and cities. That's the seventh highest number in the nation and 10 percentage points above other Midwest states. One reason for the reliance on the property tax, of course, is the lack of alternative revenue options. My question, is it time to consider broadening the sales tax, their state 5% sales tax, to now exempt products and services to reduce local government's reliance on the property taxes?
Yeah, I think that would be one of several moves that could be taken. I have no doubt that we can look at models from other states to come up with other revenue generating type ideas also. I think we can look at our pricing models for services. We could charge convenience taxes, carbon taxes. There are all kinds of things you can do. Mm-hmm. And so my point would be, yes, I think it would be better to diversify that revenue stream.
We have this annual debate on how to pay for our highway system. The state fuel tax, 30.9 cents a gallon, hasn't been raised in more than 10 years. Would you consider voting to raise the fuel tax to stabilize how Wisconsin pays for highways?
Yes.
How many pennies? 2, 3, 4?
I would actually have to sit down and use my financial and analytic capabilities.
Okay.
But I would have to actually sit down and look at the detail before I could commit to a certain number that would make sense.
Okay.
Or a certain approach.
Thank you. A study found that in 2015, out-of-state contractors were awarded $72 million in contracts for public works projects by local governments. That $72 million doubled to $146 million in 2018. Here's the question. Should bidding standards and requirements give preferences to Wisconsin companies when local governments approve public works projects?
I would say yes. To have that revenue or that income leave our state is very detrimental to our economy, I believe. Assuming that the quality's there, the cost is reasonable, obviously it has to be, it doesn't matter if it's a little bit different, but if it's massively different, I think we have to consider the downstream value of keeping that revenue and that income inside of Wisconsin for our residents to spend and our homeowners to spend.
Okay. Now, my first question was your campaign issues, and you mentioned climate change and the environment. Can you be a little bit more specific? What difference do you think you could make as one state senator on that issue?
Yeah, well, certainly I can't do anything by myself, so it'd have to be in coalitions with other senators. But certainly, as a state, we could take the lead on doing things like, setting emission standards, changing building codes to encourage more fuel efficiency or more efficiency in our buildings. We could invest in retrofitting buildings in order to make them more efficient. We've got to keep our hand on water problems. Up in Marinette, we've got the problem with PFAS in the water supply. I think we've got to, water again is so important to the health of our citizens. So I think there's a lot of things we could do. Again, you can borrow from other states to really protect their environment and minimize the impact of global warming.
Okay, we've talked about a number of issues, and is there any other issue that's central to your campaign that you want to outline now? I don't think at the moment. I think you touched on most everything. I think we could touch on this isn't really an issue, but really, what is the difference, the primary difference between my candidate and I, as far as that's my final question.
Okay,
here we go.
That's what we bring to the table.
You want to talk about the differences between you and your primary opponent? Yeah.
So, when it comes to ideology, the differences aren't going to be that great. I think the differences come in the kind of experience that we're bringing to the table. Jonathan does have some government experience, which I don't have. He's been an alderman in a small town for 3 years. Right. And he worked on his uncle's campaign and worked in his office. So he's got that background. I, on the other hand, have a lot of industry experience, specific to the healthcare industry. And I was a senior executive for over 20 years. And I spent 15 of those years in financial planning. I had a multi-billion-dollar budget that I was responsible for. In the last 5 years, I was a president of the Northeast Wisconsin market area for my employer and was responsible for 3 hospitals and 250 physician practices. And I've had to, throughout that career, I had to learn how to develop coalitions in order to get things done in a large, complex organization. So, for instance, a few years ago, I had to go to the Aurora board, or the entire board, and try to get a new hospital built up in Marinette. So I have a lot of experience in learning how do you go about planning that, making the good argument, developing a coalition before you ever bring the proposal forward,
right?
And pushing those types of things through. I've done a lot of negotiation with buying physician practices, buying ambulatory surgery centers. I've had to take over thousands of employees and get them on board with our strategy and our goals, and was always very successful with that. So I think just different kinds of experience and different depths of experience.
Appreciate that. Thank you. Sandra Ewald of Green Bay is a Democratic candidate in the 30th Senate District. The primary is August 11th. Sandra, thank you so much for talking to WisconsinEye.
And thank you for having me.
Thanks again. Thank you.
Bye.
Campaign 2020 is sponsored by Wisconsin Hospital Association, Quick Trip, Wisconsin Counties Association, Wisconsin Realtors Association, and Wisconsin Operating Engineers Local 139.